All right. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's BeWell education sessions focused on sleep health. For those of you that are BeWell participants, you can earn 5 lifestyle rewards for today, and I'll share the process for claiming your points at the end. So stick around for that. Q&A, we highly encourage asking questions. Please utilize the chat box, and we've reserved time at the end for those questions. So hang in there for that. And then finally, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, who is Emily Chalk. Emily Chalk is a senior health sciences student here at UCA. She's focusing on health promotion. She's also been BeWell's fantastic spring intern, and I've loved having her in the program this semester. So without further ado, Emily, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm super excited to be hosting this sleep health session. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and jump right in with the game plan for today with our learning objectives. So first, I'm going to explore the prevalence of sleep disorders among UCA faculty and staff, and I will be using gathered data to report my findings. And then our sleep health content expert will explain the effects of inadequate sleep health and provide strategies and recommendations for developing healthy sleep habits. Okay, and our self-reported sleep data comes from the 2021 BeWell Health Risk Assessment Survey, and our survey sample size included 610 respondents. The data is aggregate and de-identified, and it also includes a mixture of faculty and staff. Now then, the first question was asked was how many hours of sleep do you get on a typical night? And we can see here that the majority of respondents reported getting 6 or more hours of sleep on the typical night, which kind of leads us into our next question, which is, are you often tired during the day? And here we can see that the majority of respondents reported yes, or sometimes reporting tiredness throughout the day. And this is really important because we can see here that employees are reporting getting 6 or more hours of sleep. So they're getting adequate hours of sleep, but they're still reporting tiredness throughout the day, which kind of brings up how we look at quality over quantity of sleep. Then it was asked, are you a regular snorer? We had about 60% of respondents report no, but then nearly a quarter of respondents reported yes, that they are a regular snorer. And then it was inquired, has anyone noticed if you quit breathing during sleep or have been woken gasping for breath? And here we had about 80% report no, which despite that 80%, we had about 8% of employees still report yes, they do have obstructive breathing during sleep. And then the data concluded that 10% of respondents reported having sleep apnea. And we wanted to remind everyone that if you do have a sleeping disorder or you suspect that you may have a sleeping disorder, that our sleep content expert will touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Kristyn Johnson to this virtual campus experience. Welcome, Kristyn. Kristyn holds a doctorate of nursing practice, and she is an advanced practice registered nurse. She obtained her education at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and she holds a practicing specialty in sleep medicine. She has practiced at Baptist Health Sleep Clinic for 7 years, and one of the greatest joys she finds of working in sleep medicine is seeing the improvement in her patients' overall health after having years of bad sleep. Welcome, Kristyn, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Okay, so I go ahead and do the first slide.
They're being shared.
Okay, the next slide. Okay, perfect. So just to make sure y'all are all awake, everybody kind of hits a lull at the lunch hour. So I also wanted to share this, but then just use this too to say one of the joys that why I enjoy my job so much is because I have seen how much difference good sleep can make in mental health, in clarity, in function at work, in even relationships. Everybody knows you can be a little bit more emotional, a little bit more moody when you don't get good sleep. And so it really is so vital to everything that goes on in your body. And I mean, can really make a night and day difference. And I've seen that time after time in my patients. So next slide.
There's 3 very similar slides. Do you want me to go past those?
So the next slide should be a blue background with the body. Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going. Perfect. Okay. So really, like I was just saying, you can kind of see it affects every organ system basically in your body. I mean, everybody usually thinks of the neurological memory effects. Everybody has kind of had that brain fog moment where you wake up, you just feel like you can't think straight, can't remember as well when you don't get good sleep. But there actually is a physiological reason for that. At night, your brain just kind of goes through cleaning processes, gets rid of waste products, toxins, and they've actually shown that over time, people that have inadequate or insufficient sleep they have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's because your body is not having enough time to kind of get rid of all these toxins. And then mood disorders is another one. Things like anxiety, depression, bipolar, all of that, even just dealing with stress can be very much affected by the lack of sleep you get. And the reason is because when you're have lack of sleep, then it kind of makes your body enter that fight or flight response for any little stress that comes in during the day. And so basically you have all this just very heightened emotions, heightened stress reaction for any little thing, because again, your brains don't have that adequate sleep at night. Immune health is also affected by sleep. So again, kind of that cleaning process applies to immune health too. Your body kind of gets rid of just all the kind of bacteria, and then also builds up memory cells, kind of revs up that immune system at night. And so when you're not getting that sleep, you're doing your immune system a disservice. And they've actually shown too that vaccine effectiveness can be affected for lack of sleep less than 7 hours in the weeks preceding getting a vaccine. So especially with just the big push of COVID vaccines, that's also something to keep in mind. Pain, this is probably one of the most common things that I see in my patients, is they are not only getting poor sleep, but they also have pain. And a lot of times they kind of go hand in hand. Poor sleep contributes to pain, and then pain contributes to poor sleep. But they've actually shown that poor sleep, again, your body doesn't have that adequate time at night to get rid of inflammation, to get rid of toxins. And so you're going to have increased inflammation, which is going to make pain worse. And the more pain you have, of course, you're not going to sleep as well. And so it kind of just becomes this snowball effect. Blood pressure and heart rate will naturally drop at night. Core body temperature drops at night. When you don't have that adequate time for your body to have that kind of rest period per se, then that's going to push your blood pressure and your heart rate up. And then as well, your body kind of gets rid of plaque buildup at night, calcium buildup at night. When you don't have that, then you're going to have increased plaque buildup, which is going to increase your risk for stroke and heart attack. And then diabetes, kind of same thing. Your body can't get rid of, just doesn't function as well with glucose, with insulin during the day. And so that can lead to that insulin resistance. And then they've actually shown when you have less sleep, you can probably guess you make poor decisions in food making or in food choices. But they've actually shown that you are more likely to eat more carbs when you don't have more sleep. You're more likely to have diminished feelings of fullness when you have less sleep. And then just have a higher appetite as well when you don't have good sleep. So next time you think of and come up with a diet plan, make sure you're including sleep in that as well, because that can also be a very important component as well to try to lose weight and diet. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So this is kind of the big question with sleep. How much sleep do you really need? Obviously, everybody's probably heard the common like 7 to 8 hours is average. But I do want to say not everybody is a 7-8 hour type of sleeper. And so by actually forcing yourself to be in bed for 7 or 8 hours, you actually may be causing insomnia because you're trying to force your brain to be a 7 or 8 hour sleeper when really your brain really just needs 6 hours of sleep. Now, kind of how you can tell if you're a 6 hour or a 7 or 8 hour sleeper is just that if you feel, that brain fog, feel like you're sluggish during the day, feel that dozing off during the day, getting 6 hours, you probably are going to need more. But if you can function just fine on 6 hours, if you actually try to force yourself to get 7 or 8 hours, you're going to have more trouble sleeping and likely even get less than 6 hours of sleep. So kind of, just do kind of a test and just see what really you function best on. With that being said, 6 is really the minimum that we recommend people of hours of sleep people get. They really show diminished just performance, memory recall when you get less than 6 hours. So not to push 7 or 8 hours, but also make sure you're at least getting 6 hours. Next slide. So there are two really main systems that are going to control how well you sleep and how long you sleep. And that is sleep drive and wake drive. So your sleep drive, think of that as kind of the thing that you can control. So that is basically the longer that you've been awake, the higher your sleep drive will increase. And so when that's at the highest is going to be your greatest urge to sleep. So if you take a nap during the day, that's going to lower your sleep drive. If you sleep in, that's going to push out how much time you're actually going to have to be awake. And so that's going to lower your sleep drive at night. So going back to that previous slide of if most people need 7 or 8 hours of sleep time, if you subtract that from 24 hours in a day, then that leaves you basically 16 hours on average of wake time. So you really need that good 16 hours of wake time to be able to have a high enough sleep drive to then be able to sleep that 7 or 8 hours. By sleeping in, by pushing out, how long you're sleeping or being in bed, you're then going to go into your lowering how much wake time you have, which will then lead to a lower sleep drive. And then your circadian rhythm, kind of your wake drive, is more regulated by your brain. So your brain has wake hormones and has sleep hormones. And this is basically going to be regulated by the light that enters your eyes. And so it does correlate a lot with just the sunset, sundown. And so kind of as the sun sets, or if you were in a lot of bright fluorescent light during the day, that's also going to affect that kind of that wake drive. If you're on your phone a lot at night, that's a really bright light. Those lights from electronics like an iPad, an iPhone, computer, think of those as almost equivalent to the sunlight. And so if your brain is seeing this sun per se at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, your brain's going to think, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We don't need to shut down everything from the day and rev up our sleep hormones. And so that's, again, going to push your circadian and your wake drive out. And so our goal basically to get you to sleep the best is going to kind of correlate when your sleep drive is the highest after having a good 16 hours of awake time. And then when your brain having, lower light in the evenings, sun's going down, little to no use of electronics, when that is lowest, then that's kind of when you're going to have the optimum time to go to sleep. And, they say 10, 11 to 6, 7 a.m. is kind of the average. But there are night owls that, your sleep drive may not, your wake drive, may not really be, it may be more of like a 12 to 8 or a 1 to 9 even rhythm. And then you also have the early birds that it may be shifted the other way. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a 10 to 11 bedtime, 6 to 7 wake time to get good sleep. Next slide. So this is a very common question that I get in my practice is how well does my Fitbit know that I'm sleeping? Or they come in and say, well, my Fitbit is not telling me that I sleep well. So kind of my 2 cents about Fitbits. They do have some accuracy in them. There's kind of conflicting information as far as how accurate they are. Some show that they aren't. Some say that they are. Really, from what all the sources that I was looking at, it can tell a good amount of differentiating sleep stages, but it does not do a very good job at telling if you're awake. And so if it's saying you're having a lot of wake spells during the night, that may not necessarily, or even time that it falls asleep, may not necessarily be accurate. But here's my issue with using a Fitbit to tell you how well you slept. It just makes you more fixated, even more anxious possibly in your sleep, depending on how your Fitbit tells you sleep. And so we know anxiety is a very common interference with sleep. And so if you're stressing, if you're dreading going to sleep, if you're worried, night after night about, am I going to get enough sleep? How's my, then that is just going to actually lead to worse sleep by trying to focus so much on your sleep. And so I just wanted to share this study. It was really interesting. They separated 2 different groups out that got same amount of sleep, but they manipulated a Fitbit to show poor sleep, and then have the Fitbit show the correct amount of sleep, which was good quality sleep, on another group. Throughout the group that had poor sleep, they actually showed they had poor mood. They had slower thought processing during the day. They had more sleepiness. And so even though they got the same amount of sleep as the other people, by just looking at that Fitbit that told them they got poor sleep, they actually functioned poorer than the group that showed that it had had good sleep. So I really try actually to discourage people from using your Fitbit, or use it, just kind of take it as a grain of salt, because it sometimes actually knowledge is not beneficial in this sense. Okay, next slide. Don't go back. There we go. Okay, so what do we do when you still don't feel rested? Just like that they showed the stats, obviously there's a lot of people that don't wake up feeling rested. Now, one thing I want to take time to point out is you can get good sleep and not necessarily wake up bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, bouncing out of bed. I'm not one of those morning people that wake up bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. So just because you can't bounce out of bed does not mean you're not getting good sleep. Really, if you've got sustained energy through the day, you're not dozing off, you feel clear-headed. When you wake up, you don't feel like, man, I could use a couple more hours of sleep. Then that's typically, even if you may still feel groggy, I don't want to get up out of bed, you still got good sleep. So if you don't feel that, it can fall more into a tired feeling and a sleepy feeling, and trying to pinpoint the cause of why you're not feeling rested during the day. We've kind of got to look at, is it being tired or is it being sleepy? So tired is more of that heavy feeling, just can't get off the couch, don't feel like doing anything, low motivation for doing activities. And if you do try to lay down and take a nap during the day, you might not fall asleep, or you may not feel rested if you do end up falling asleep. And so these things, that is a little bit harder to pinpoint because it can be a wide variety of causes. Insomnia is a big one that we see in our clinic, but things like if you've got anemia, if you've got depression, bipolar, chronic pain, thyroid issues can all also kind of cause this fatigue feeling, but not necessarily a sleepy feeling. Now, so sleepy, on the other hand, is going to be actually like eyelids feel heavy, I'm nodding off, I'm dozing off. And so that can be usually will relieved by quality sleep. Now, underlined quality, because if you do have a sleep disorder, such as restless leg, sleep apnea, narcolepsy, you will not feel rested if you do lay down and take a nap, because even napping, you're not getting good quality sleep. Now, if you say you just got you just shortchanged yourself on sleep one night, maybe just got 4 or 5 hours of sleep, feel sleepy the next day, you take a nap, feel more rested, then, the sleepiness obviously is just from not getting enough sleep the night before. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So one of probably the most common causes that I see of just not feeling tired is insomnia. So this can be situational. I have a lot of people that just, it's pretty common if you have a flight or trip the next morning, if you have a presentation the next morning, if you have a lot on your mind, if you had any kind of, stress life change, you're not going to sleep, and it can kind of come in waves. So more what I focus on in my clinic is more the chronic insomnia. It's not happening, at least it's happening 3 times a week for about a month. And then we can kind of look at how we can correct that. So what we define that as is difficulty falling asleep or difficulty going back to sleep if it's the middle of the night. And that usually time frame we look at is about 30 minutes. More than 30 minutes we consider abnormal. Less than 30 minutes we consider normal. And then again, kind of like I touched on before, if you're getting 6 or 7 hours of sleep but can function okay during the day, we're not really going to consider that insomnia. But if you are getting 6 or 7 hours of sleep or time in bed, and you've got that kind of memory fog, then that's going to play more into the insomnia. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, should be one more. Nope, one more. There we go. Okay. So a lot of times, I really want to touch on sleep hygiene because a lot of times our behavior can actually be causing the insomnia. So I spend a lot of time doing education on this because, some of these things may be common sense, some of these things may not be, but it can really make a difference in sleep quality just by fixing some of these things alone without any other medication, without any other intervention. So keeping a regular bed and wake time. This is so huge, especially in the college population. I don't know if y'all find that much in your students, but some people will be going to bed at 9 and then midnight if they have a late paper, or you've got something the next morning, so you've got to get up at 6, but then you sleep it on the weekends. And I know people hate hearing this, but if we're talking about getting good sleep, if we're talking about feeling rested during the day, really, I'll tell people you don't want to be sleeping in on the weekends past an hour of what your typical wake time is during the week. And so we really want to get that bedtime and that wake time down to about 30 minutes during the week. And then, I'll give you an hour or so on the weekend to sleep in a little bit. And no matter how well you slept, you want to still keep that same wake time. And that kind of just goes back to that circadian wake drive where we're just trying to get your brain to figure out when you're supposed to be awake, when you're supposed to be asleep. So not only will that help you sleep better, but then you'll also be more alert, more awake during the day, the more consistent that can be. Spending no more than 8 or 9 hours in bed. Again, no matter how well you slept, you still want to get up after that 8 or 9 hours so that you have a good 16 hours of awake time. And so, it may be that if you're only still spending 8 hours in bed, you may need to even bump that down to 6 or 7 hours to where you may be actually in bed less time. It kind of seems counterintuitive, but you're getting a good quality 6 or 7 hours. And maybe that you're just trying to force yourself to be an 8-hour brain. And so that's actually why you're not sleeping well. So actually, sometimes my long-term insomniacs, I'll tell them, we're just going to keep you in bed for 6 or 7 hours until you start getting good sleep. And then we can maybe add, 15, 30 minutes here and there. Okay, so finding a relaxing activity an hour before bed is also really important. We always tell our kids, okay, it's time to wind down. Well, you've been working all day, especially with screens, there's just so much stimulation from the day. You really need to give your brain a good hour break of just little stimulation as possible. And so I, try right in the hour or so before your bed, try to avoid catching up on work, checking emails, engaging in any kind of very stimulating TV show or book even. Reading and TV shows are great to kind of help you wind down, but if I tell people, if it's a murder mystery that you want to just keep watching until you find out who the next one did it, or you're going to go to bed thinking who's the bad guy, probably not a good wind down activity. Things like listening to audiobooks are good, listening to podcasts, listening to music. TV is okay, but make sure in that wind down period, you're not using your electronic devices. such as a phone, iPad, computer, which goes into the next point of those electronics now before bed. That's another big one that I find people are using their phone to play solitaire, to read, to look at Facebook, to look at emails. And so that again, you've got that really bright light that your brain's thinking, oh, it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so it's not going to start shutting down. Or if you even can use that, to playing solitaire or whatnot to get you to sleep, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, then it's again because that wake drive, that circadian rhythm, your brain is not quite releasing enough sleep hormone. You might be able to fall asleep, but you can't stay asleep because you've had that bright light right before bedtime. And everybody knows, obviously, the more active you can be, that's just going to increase that's actual sleep drive, make your body more tired, make your brain more tired. If try to avoid physical activity in that hour or two before bedtime, because that's going to kind of get your system revved up. But I also tell people, a little physical activity before bedtime, if that's all you can do, I think that's better than none at all. So if that's the only time you can do it, from 7 or 8, because you've got kids to put to bed, or you've got, you're running and doing things all day, still I encourage that, because that's again going to get your brain tired enough to be more worn down at night. And then napping too. Usually 30-minute nap is not going to do too much harm to your sleep. Any more than that, it's really going to play into that sleep drive again, to where you're going to basically recharge your batteries right in the middle of the day. And so instead of going to bed with 10-15% battery life, you're going to have a 50-60% battery life. And so your brain's not going to want to sleep, 7 or 8 hours. And really, your brain can only sleep a good 7 or 8 hours in a 24-hour period. And so if you're using up an hour or two during the day to nap, then that's going to count into your sleep at night, because your brain, you've already used up some of that sleep time during the day. Avoiding caffeine after lunch. So a lot of people are surprised when I tell them caffeine can actually stay in your system up to 8 hours. So if you're going to bed at 10, that means 2 o'clock and later, you will still have caffeine in your system. And I also have a lot of people tell me, well, caffeine doesn't affect me. And to which I respond, but are you sleeping well? Because if you are not, caffeine would be one of those things. And insomnia is also a very multifactorial disorder, to where we really have to attack every single one of these, attack it from every angle to get you good sleep. We can't just fix one thing or another. We really kind of have to put all of the pieces together to get you sleeping well. And then last thing is just, if you aren't asleep within 20-30 minutes, the likelihood of you falling asleep after that is probably very low, and it's just going to make your insomnia worse. So if you're not asleep, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and are not asleep within 20-30 minutes, get up, go get a drink of water, go take a lap around the house. If you still feel just like you're wide awake, then you want to go back to that kind of relaxing wind down activity, maybe that you did right before bedtime, like listening to the book, or but just something that will kind of help relax you without getting on a screen, without turning on a bunch of light, as little stimulation as you can, to just try to get your brain to relax again. Okay, next slide.
Real quick, I just want to take a quick pause. I know many of you have reserved just the 12 to 12:30 half hour. We totally understand if you need to get on with the rest of your day. This is being recorded, and I will send out the recording link and a certificate of attendance. If you can stay, we are going to keep going, and we'd love for you to stay on board with us. This has been really great information. So, but just letting anybody know, you're not rude for leaving where we're running over time. So you can go ahead, but we're going to go ahead and move forward.
Okay. So sorry, guys. So this next slide is probably the other big important one. If you can hang on for like 5 more minutes, and then the rest of the stuff I'll just kind of breeze through. But so sleep apnea and insomnia are probably the two main puzzle pieces of causing poor sleep. Okay, one more slide. There we go. Okay. So go back. So obstructive sleep apnea is basically where your airway is closing off at night. Think of it like you're drinking a thick milkshake through a straw. It's closing off. You're not getting oxygen. And just like that first slide that we talked about how vital sleep is for your body, oxygen is also very vital for your body, as you can imagine. And so I know a lot of people said that they don't snore on those surveys, but I do want to say it is a common misconception that that no snorers, or if you're a skinny person, you can't have sleep apnea. it basically can be an overweight problem, but can also be an anatomy problem. If you've got polyps in your nose, if you've got large tonsils, if you've got a large tongue, if you've got just crowded space in your mouth, then that is going to narrow your airway. Even if you're fit and little, that can include your airway and affect the oxygen. And also want to say too, real quick, we are doing mostly home sleep tests now out of our clinic. And so it's a real easy test that you just take home one night. You don't have to go to a new place. You can do it at your own home in your own bed. And so it is a really simple way now to evaluate for sleep apnea. Whereas a lot of people, I think, dreaded it before because they had just nightmares of going to the sleep lab and get tested. Okay, next slide. So stop and bang are kind of the there you go. Kind of the general rule of thumb of screening tools that we look at for sleep apnea. And y'all can read those on the screen. And which, a lot of those things, high blood pressure is probably the only one that maybe not people are as familiar about, but most of the other things, mostly everybody can probably guess what would be a high risk factor for sleep apnea. Okay, next slide. And this again just kind of shows, every aspect of the body that sleep apnea, which is not getting adequate oxygen at night, can affect. It more than doubles your risk of stroke and heart attack. And then even atrial fib too. I'll have a lot of cardiologists send me their patients that have atrial fib, because if you have atrial fib with untreated sleep apnea, no matter if you're on medicine, if you have a shock procedure done, it will typically flip back into that atrial fib despite those interventions, because you've not treated the root cause, which is sleep apnea. And so, a lot of these things that we don't even stroke, you don't really think about in correlation with sleep apnea, but it actually can be sleep apnea that caused that in the first place. So it really is important to make sure that that's not kind of an underlying issue going on. And next slide. So restless leg and parasomnia are two of the other kind of minor sleep issues that we deal with that can affect that rested feeling the next morning. So as you can imagine, if you're moving your legs a lot, it's basically like you've run a marathon in your sleep. And so some people even do that without realizing. If you notice your sheets are all messed up in the morning, if your partner is telling you you're kicking them, then it's likely that you have restless legs. And this can be from sleep apnea that's not been treated, or low iron is another big cause of restless leg. And then parasomnias, we see this a lot in kids, but not as much in adults. It's fairly normal to see it in kids, but in adults, that can be sleepwalking, that can be sitting up in bed, that can be going to the kitchen and eating something without realizing it, but you have little to no recall of that the next morning. Is the big key. And this can be mostly from either different medications, can be stress induced, or from a sleep disorder, such as narcolepsy or sleep apnea, which is the next slide that I'm actually going to talk about real quickly. So one more. A lot of people, go back. A lot of people think of narcolepsy as people just dropping out, falling on the ground. Really, narcolepsy is just kind of a disorder of your brain and those sleep and wake hormones. If you think of your brain as having a light switch, it turns on during the day, turns off at night. With narcolepsy, it's basically going on and off, all during the day, all during the night. And so that's kind of what makes you sleepy, is because your brain's actually trying to get you to sleep during the day. And then at night, you will frequently have arousals. You'll wake up a lot, have real restless sleep, because your brain is trying to actually wake you up at night. And so there's just this lack of a dramatic shift with narcolepsy. And usually we're going to see that most commonly in females. And then the symptoms also start from 18 to 25. And so excessive sleepiness, like that, the actual sleepy feeling, not the tired that we talked about. Sleep paralysis, which is where you wake up, your brain's awake, your eyes are awake, but you can't move, can't speak. And then excessive dreaming, or those frequent arousals at night are also characteristic of narcolepsy. Okay, now we can move to the next slide. So we have a clinic in Little Rock, and then we also have do the clinic in Conway. That if you haven't any questions, if any of this raised a red flag, you think you or even a spouse may have, I would love to see you. And to make an appointment, you can do the number on the screen. And I checked, and the insurance with UCA does not require any kind of referral for specialties, so you can just call yourself and make an appointment.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing. That way I'm on a laptop, so it's easier for me to see everybody. There we go. And I'm going to take just a quick moment. I am going to, for anybody that needs to leave, I'm going to put a couple things in the chat, but then we're going to stand for a few minutes and answer questions if you all are able to stay. So let me get off that and back to my email here. Just one second. And again, this is, stay with us if you can, but if you need to go, we understand. There's a link to the session evaluation survey in the chat. It takes like a minute to complete. It's really quick. And then there's that certificate of attendance PDF that you can just download and submit for your points. I'm also going to flash it at the screen right at the end, but I'm not quite ready to do that just yet. Okay, let me go back to this chat here and see what we've got there. Let's see. Someone asked if you have any recommendations for a mattress. Does a mattress play a major factor in sleep health or sleep hygiene?
I asked that, Mariah, sorry.
Yes, thank you. No, Eric, that's a great question. Kristyn, do you have any comments on that?
It absolutely does play, and more because it plays into that pain factor. You know, if your mattress is more than 8-10 years old, you know, you're going to have lack of support, which is going to play into the pain, which is going to affect your sleep. So I don't really have a mattress recommendation just because everybody is so different in what they prefer. So I just tell people, you know, just go to mattress store and lay down on some of them and just try. But absolutely, if your mattress is more than 10 years old, know that that could be a big reason why you aren't sleeping well.
Okay, that was a good question, Eric. Thank you. Is it a bad thing that I can go to sleep within seconds each time I lay down? I'm thankful for it, but it seems to be abnormal to most people in my life. That's a good one too.
It is not a bad thing if it is nighttime. If it is an appropriate time to fall asleep. That just means your sleep drive is really high at night. That means you have worn your body out, you have worn your brain out, you are mentally taxed. So that is a good thing. Now, if you are able to fall asleep that quickly during the day, then there is likely an issue that we need to dig further into. But if it's just at night, no, absolutely, that is a gift. I would run with it.
We had a question about the cost of diagnostics for sleep issues. You can probably speak to this, Kristyn, but just kind of a general. So as Kristyn mentioned, she is an in-network provider at Baptist Health with our UCA health insurance. I'm going to guess, though, that each patient is so individualized in terms of what's recommended and then sort of the diagnostic process. So that'd probably be a question more for the benefits team or for calling United Healthcare and checking with them on your specific needs. But Kristyn, do you have any other comments to add on that?
I will just say real quick, because we are mostly doing home sleep tests now, it is considerably cheaper than having to go to the sleep lab and do it. So it's much more reasonable. It's much easier now with the home sleep test.
Yes, got it. I love that tip. That was great. Okay. Someone said the home test wasn't great for them, that they actually did better with the overnight. So again, I think that just kind of depends on the person.
Right.
But I love that you're saying it's much more accessible for the general public. I think that is a huge plus. Question, should parasomnia be concerning if you see it in your kids? Will they just grow out of it?
It is very common in kids, and the majority, and sometimes it's until like 14, 15, 16, that they have it. But most kids, I would say, unless there's some underlying stress things going on, most of them will grow out of it. And it's not really anything to be concerned about unless there is a safety concern where they're, walking out the house, walking around and there's sharp objects around. That's really the only concern that I would have.
Gotcha. That was a good question, Vicki. My child has, one of my boys has some pretty interesting night terror kind of things happening. Okay. What about dreams and nightmares? How much do they factor in when it comes to sleep? Good question.
So I tell everybody, and it's, dreams are so obscure that nobody's really been able to tell us like why you dream or what the reason, for dreams are. But kind of my general rule of thumb, and this is not really applicable to everybody because there are some people that just don't dream. And again, there's not really an explanation because we don't really understand dream sleep very well, but you want to be able to wake up. So you actually are in a little bit more of an alert state when you're dreaming. So you should be able to wake up and kind of have a vague recollection of what you dreamed about. If you can wake up and recall every single detail about that dream the next morning, likely you weren't actually in a deep enough sleep before that. You weren't actually too light of sleep that you can recall every detail. So kind of my general rule of thumb is it is good to sleep, to dream, but you don't want to be able to recall every single vivid detail, or for it to be a nightmare also and wake you up in the middle of the night and not be able to go back to sleep.
This has been fantastic dialogue in the chat box. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else at the moment. Emily, would you take a moment and share that last slide, which is just for anybody that wants to take a photo on their cell phone and use the app to load up their points? We'll do that. It's also helpful for anybody that is viewing this recorded. You can still get your 5 points, even if you're not watching this live. Just take a picture, a screenshot, snip, get that loaded up to your account, get your 5 points. Please don't send it to me. Submit it right to your account to get your points. And that'll do that. Okay, I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you so much, Kristyn, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I learned a ton. I'm hopeful that everybody else got a lot out of it as well. Thank you, Emily, for opening us up with that data. You did a great job. And Kristyn, hopefully we'll have you back again in the future. I know this is a topic that, is of course subject to new research and findings, and we'd love to have you back in the future. So thanks again for being here. Everybody have a great afternoon.